Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed the heir of all things, through whom also He created the world. He's the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of His nature. And He upholds the universe by the word of His power. After making purification for sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name He has inherited is more excellent than theirs. And He's seated on the throne. And tomorrow's election will not change that. And our hope, and we need this reminder, is not in the White House. It's not in Congress, and it's not in the Senate. Our hope is on the throne of God. And Jesus Christ is seated there. And I love what the Hebrew writer expresses to us there. He's there only because He has completed a job. He is now seated at the right hand of God, but it wasn't until He had done something, and that is His mission that He had been set out to accomplish here on earth, which is the purification for our sins. And after having done the work that the Lord intended for Him to do, He is now seated. And He is now King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And therefore, our anxieties and our stresses should go away. Because the direction of this nation does not matter. Because our faith has been established in the works that Jesus the Christ completed when He was here on this earth. And having completed those, He is now seated at the right hand of God. I think it's appropriate for us to look in the prophet Daniel. Look in Daniel. And we're going to start in Daniel chapter 2. It's appropriate to look here because everybody talks about how our nation is unraveling. I'm not really concerned with which way you vote tomorrow. But on both sides, people say something is broken and it's not as good as it was, or it's not as good as it should be. But our anxiety should be different than that. And you think about Daniel. You want to talk about a broken government? You want to talk about hope being stripped away from somebody? That's the place that Daniel found himself. His nation, as he knew it, had crumbled and been taken away into Babylonian captivity. And you want to talk about immorality and greed, arrogance and pride? That was the Babylonian Empire. And Daniel lived and served the God of heaven during those days. He would say to the king of Babylon during those days, while he interpreted the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, but also in a manner which those living with Daniel could understand and hear, he would say these words. Verse 44, and in the days of those kings, he was talking about in the days of the Roman Empire, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all the kingdoms and bring them to an end. And it shall stand forever. He goes on to say, just as you saw a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. Daniel was certain that that kingdom would be established, and in many ways, he longed to be a part of that kingdom. What would he do if he could be a part of that kingdom and know that the work of salvation that God had planned, that he could live in that time, and he could preach a message that would save all mankind? Daniel would rejoice in those days. Daniel would be glad and rejoice. And so Wednesday morning, when your candidate doesn't win, you rejoice. You rejoice that you have an opportunity to live in this kingdom that will never be shaken and will never be destroyed. I want us to look a little bit more at Daniel and the way in which they wanted to really upset his life and change his life. Our government, no matter who's elected, will not oppress us in the manner in which the Babylonian Empire oppressed Daniel. Verse 6 of Daniel chapter 1. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. They wouldn't even let them wear the name that their mother had given them. They oppressed them to the point that they stripped them of their own identity. Their Jewish heritage was taken away from them by an oppressive government. Brethren, we've not tasted such oppression. And therefore, we rejoice for what we have materially and on this earth, but more so in the kingdom that Daniel promised would come and the kingdom that we know that we're a part of today. Daniel had a message that would go on and on through the different kings. He had a lot of change that happened in his life. He was in Israel, taken from Israel by the Babylonians and served the Babylonian Empire. And then the Medes came in, and then the Persians came in, and it was change after change after change. But here's what's interesting about Daniel. The message that he had for the people, it did not change. He would say this to King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 13 of chapter 4 in Daniel. Verse 13 of chapter 4 in Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar reflects and says, I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in my bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip of its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beast flee from under it and the birds from its branches, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth. Bound with a band of iron and bronze amid the tender grass of the field, let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast mind be given to him. And let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones. To this end, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. And that was true in the days of the Babylonian Empire, and it's true today. That the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. And then he has this message for the prideful Nebuchadnezzar, and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. The Lord can work out his plan and his will with whoever is in the White House. They won't stop him, because the kingdom that he has established, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. The message continues. Daniel chapter 5 and verse 17. Daniel chapter 5 and starting in verse 17. Belshazzar is hearing this message, and Daniel reminds him of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Then Daniel answered and said, before the king, let your gifts be for yourselves, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O king most high, God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. All that Nebuchadnezzar accomplished was because God allowed it. Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't have wanted to hear that in the time of his life. He would have thought that he had accomplished it and he had grabbed it. But what Daniel says is, it was given to him. Verse 19, and because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. When his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne. And his glory was taken from him, because God rules in the kingdoms of men. Continuing in verse 21, he was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the donkey. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you. And you and your lords, your wives, your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you've praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, of iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. The king that day needed to understand that the very breath that he was breathing belonged to God. And I'm afraid, by looking at the Facebook posts and hearing about the anxieties of people in the church today, we need to be reminded of that as well. That our very breath and our existence comes from God. And God rules. And he has set the true king on the throne. And nothing can take that away from us. The last thing I want to notice is in chapter 6. After Daniel is thrown into the lion's den, yet another king is introduced to this concept and this idea. Verse 25, after King Darius has seen the salvation of Daniel, he says this, Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is a living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. And that same God is still alive and well today. And so this evening, we're going to pray to that God. And so the verses that we read this evening will be more pointed toward the reaction that we need to have to our government. And the thought process we need to have to our government. And our prayers will reflect that as well. But the songs we sing, as they've been introduced to us, will be in praise of the true King, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. We're going to read a psalm here and then have a prayer for us. It's the 72nd Psalm. And I do understand that as we read that, a lot of that is true for the kings of Israel that was being prayed for through the psalm. But it also pointed to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords that we opened up our conversation with. But it's interesting that there's so much about that in the 72nd Psalm that's being prayed that we can pray today as well. The prayer in the 72nd Psalm was this, that the leader and the ruler, whoever they were, that all peoples would offer prayer for them. May we be more fervent in that area and be prayerful for all those who rule over us. Whether they're affiliated with a political party that we agree with or not, may we offer prayer on their behalf.